Now, the moment has come. We will reveal what EIGE had been for so long working on. 10 years. In that period, we had a strong economic crisis. We all know that's always women who are hit first. So let's see what the outcome is. Jolanta Reingardė is going to present. She's from Lithuania and has been with EIGE from 2010, which means almost from the start. And she's the senior researcher. Actually, Jolanta really knows all the answers. And more than that, she knows all the questions. Actually, she is what Google wants to be. Not only knowing all the answers, but already knowing all the questions. Google works on that, but we have Jolanta. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you a lot. One of the first assignments that in gender equality that I received as a student in my undergraduate studies in 1994 was to go and interview my mother about a certain episode in her life in order to understand what it meant for her as a woman to survive it. My mother worked as an engineer in a state-owned company producing power cables. It was an environment very dominated by men. And my mother was a sole breadwinner many years in her life after the death of my father. And my mother told me that she knew she will never be promoted to a higher post because there were simply no women in the leading positions. She was offered to work in a night shift in order to earn more, but she was never offered a higher post. She knew she's earning less than her male colleagues in the same post. She was also harassed at work, but she could never talk about it because she wanted to keep her job. Since then, the company progressed a lot. It's one of the leading companies in the country. It's very proud of its performance, of its profits, of its quality certification, and rightly so, just like many companies in the European Union. But can the same be said about gender equality? Did gender equality progress to the same extent as economies, technologies, and even bureaucracies in the European Union? Gender Equality Index is a result of a long consultation process with very many organizations and individuals to whom we are very grateful for their support and contribution. First of all, EIGE's bodies, EIGE's Working Group on Gender Equality Index Experts Forum and Management Board, our major data providers, Eurostat and Eurofound and FRA. We're also very grateful to our key stakeholders in European Union institutions and also governments of member states, civil society organizations which are united under the umbrella of a social platform, and also social partners, but also to the previous and the current staff members of EIGE who provided very, very big intellectual input and support and encouragement in all this work. Gender Equality Index is adapted to the context of the reality, to the realities of the European Union, and is aligned to EU policy priorities. Since 2013, when it was launched for the first time, Gender Equality Index informed lots of policy debates and discussions at European Union level. It was used and very widely, broadly quoted in different reports and research findings and statistical yearbooks and civil society opinions. And we would like to keep it to the same level, and we would like it to be even broader used than before. Gender Equality Index is measuring gender gaps between women and men, but it also takes into account the context of specific country and levels of achievement. So the good overall score in the scale from 1 to 100 reflects both narrow or absent gender gaps and a good situation for all. For example, high employment rates for both women and men. Country will never rank high in the scale if both women and men are faring equally badly. This is not what we are aiming at. Okay, now let's look briefly at the structure of Gender Equality Index. It's probably familiar for many of you, but I would like to use this opportunity to introduce you the new elements that we worked on during the last 2 years, the new updates and the new developments that we introduced in the Gender Equality Index. In the domain of work, we are looking at the 3 dimensions, at participation, segregation, and quality of work. Quality of work is covered by 2 dimensions, work-life balance and a new dimension which is called career prospects. That new dimension is informed by Eurofound's Career Prospects Index. It looks at types of contracts, security of contract, and also the opportunities for career advancement at work. So this is a new element, and we believe it's very important from gender equality perspective. In the domain of money, we are looking at the financial resources and also economic situation of women and men. And the financial resources, 2 very important areas would be the gender gaps in earnings and income, and the economic situation, we are looking at risk of poverty level and also a difference between wealthiest and poorest people in Europe. And that, of course, is a very important dimension when we look at it from gender perspective. In the domain of knowledge, we're looking at attainment and segregation and lifelong learning. There are no new elements introduced in this domain, but we have quite a number of new elements introduced in the domain of time. The caring was extended to caring of older people and people with disabilities in the families. In the previous index, we looked only at caring for children. And also in the domain of time, this time we look not only at working population, but population at large, because we know that caring might be a reason for many people not to get engaged in the labor market. Therefore, it's important to have the whole population in mind. Domain of power, it's for the first time, provides a broader picture by looking not only at political and economic decision-making, but also now we can see who is behind the news headlines, who is deciding on research funding, and who is leading the sports world. So these are 3 new dimensions that are included under social power and is aggregated together with political and economic decision-making. In the domain of health, it's for the first time we included a new data on health behavior. Now we will see who have healthy diets, who spends more time on physical activities, are the smoking and drinking habits of women and men similar or different. This is a very interesting domain and is clearly very relevant from gender equality perspective. Now, our index provides a broader scope because 2 satellite domains were significantly developed. Although they do not impact the core, they are equally important parts of our general concept of understanding of gender equality. The notion against the domain of violence is that freedom from violence is an integral part of gender equality. We do not imagine a society, gender equal society, where violence against women is still prevalent. EIGE developed a measurement framework of violence against women, which will be presented in a separate event in the European Parliament, closer to International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women. It provides a measure of violence against women. It's a good measure of gender equality, but secondly, it sets a basis for monitoring of the Istanbul Convention in the European Union, because the whole framework is based on the concept of Istanbul Convention. And now, intersecting inequalities, the circle which is embracing the whole index, which is also not a part of the core, but which provides a broad and very important perspective to gender equality index. Here we are looking at differences among women and men and how gender intersects with other characteristics and differences: family type, education, age, disability, country of birth. Okay, the 6 core domains are aggregated into gender equality index. The formula looks scary, but nobody says that the route to gender equality is easy. The scale of interpretation is from 1 to 100. The closer to 100 we are, the better is the situation. Now, let's take a look to the results of the gender equality index. What are they showing to us? The current score is 66.2. We made a progress and we moved forward by 4 points. This is a little improvement, but knowing that European Union is not lagging behind on the global scale, this, objectively speaking, could be interpreted as slow as the snail's pace. The best performing countries are Sweden, Denmark, followed by Finland and Netherlands. Sweden and Denmark has been the best performing countries during the 10 years period, and both of them increased their scores also during the last decade. Of course, the situation at EU level would look a little bit different if we remove Sweden from the rank. As you see, it's not fair to expect that Sweden will be lifting the European Union score all the time. And the country which is the lowest in the rank is Greece, with a score of 50. We clearly see that some improvements are needed there, followed also by Hungary and Slovakia, which are always low on the scale. Now, let's see which is the most improved country, and if you were right in this exercise that you just completed before me. Unfortunately, you were not exactly right, because the best improved country is Italy. They earned 12.9 points, and they went up the ladder, and now they are in the 14th position, but showing the best improvement in the last 10 years. The second country is Cyprus, and then we have Slovenia and Thailand tied together. They are sharing the 3rd place. So these are the best performing countries during the 10 years period. Unfortunately, I would like to mention also the 3 which show the least improvement during the 10 years. It's United Kingdom, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, the only country which has a minor score in gender equality index during the 10 years period. Okay, now, what can index tell to us and policymakers at the domain level? If we look at the scores at the domain level, you will see that the lowest scores are in the domain of power, knowledge, and time. And I would like to start speaking exactly from there. Domain of power. Although this is the fastest moving forward domain, and probably we know the reasons behind that, because this is the area which was quite high on political agenda, especially since 2010. And we see that the 23 countries actually made improvement in the domain of power, especially in economic decision-making. And the score increased by 10 points. But I want to say that the situation is still far from ideal, because domain of power still has the lowest score. For example, in financial decision-making, we are just creeping forward. There is almost no change. Men are dominating finance ministers, national central banks. The share of women on the boards of national central banks increased only fractionally, from 16% in 2005 to 19% in 2015. the membership of women in European Central Bank is consistently below 10%. And did you know that European Union is represented in International Monetary Fund only by men? There is not a single woman on the board of governors. And there are other areas in the decision-making which will be broader discussed by my colleague in the afternoon session. Now, if we look at which countries improved the most in the domain of power, you could probably guess that this is the Italy, which is with the score plus 29, which lifted the whole country so high in gender equality index. It's actually because of improved balance in decision-making. So this is the domain which made the biggest impact on Italy's overall performance. The second country is France, and then we have Slovenia. And this plus 24, plus 29 is quite impressive. It's a big jump. It's a big jump. And in Italy and France, the change happened since 2012. So here we're talking about few years and the improvements that were done in a few years' time. And the least improved countries, Finland, -3. This is again since 2012. There was a drop of women after the last elections. Then we have Slovakia and Czech Republic. This is a situation more or less at country level. Now, if we look at the domain of knowledge, the improvement was basically led by increased numbers of women and men in education. So the levels of education increased, and the share of women and men in general in the tertiary education system increased. But the problems in the domain of knowledge, like segregation, remain very deeply entrenched. 2/3 of women are still choosing so-called traditional feminine professions like education, health and welfare, humanities and arts. And men are traditionally still going for so-called STEM education. Another very important finding in the domain of knowledge is that lifelong learning, which is perceived such an important area in this changing economy and in this context of new requirements for job qualifications, it remains at a zero level of change, no change during the last decade. And people who are, for example, with low qualifications, or the ones who are in precarious jobs, could benefit a lot from that. Even gender segregation in the labor market could benefit a lot, because lifelong learning could provide a context of these broader opportunities where people could actually change also their profiles and maybe gain new skills. The countries which improved the most in the domain of knowledge is Cyprus. And if you remember, Cyprus was the second country after Italy. And actually, in case of Cyprus, the driving force is in the area of education, not decision-making like in Italy's case. Then Greece and Luxembourg. The least improved countries are Poland, Germany here, and UK. Yes, we will later produce a country analysis, and every country will receive more detailed information what is meant by these negative scores. Domain of time is unfortunately the only domain where we are regressing, where the gender inequalities are so persistent and they are growing. It's the only domain which has a negative score. It's not a big difference, -1, but still very important. The countries which perform the best here are Sweden, Netherlands, and Denmark, and countries at the bottom of the rank, Bulgaria, Greece, and Slovakia. If we look which countries improved the most in this domain, would be Latvia, Czech Republic, and Spain. And the least improved countries, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Belgium. What I want to say here is that it's only every third man in European Union is engaged in cooking and housework. And only every third man does at least 1 hour, spends at least 1 hour per day on childcare. Let me revert it and to say that 2/3 of men do not do even an hour on that. And what effect does that have? It has a spillover effect, because if women spend more time on caring, they, of course, have less time on social activities. And the index shows that men are more engaged in sports, in leisure, and they have more time for other activities outside the home. It sounds very natural, right? As when we think about the day bound by 24 hours. Okay, in the domain of work, we have a painfully slow change. It's painfully slow. If the change is a bit higher in some member states, in some other member states, it's so slow that actually at this aggregated level, of average level, it's very slow. The countries that improved the most is Malta, Luxembourg, and Cyprus. Yes, we know very well the developments in Malta. More women, much more women are engaged in the labor market, and these changes happened recently. The least improved countries are Denmark, Slovakia, and Romania. But we have to keep one thing in mind, that engagement of women in labor market does not necessarily lead to higher scores, because we have an evidence that women might come to the areas which are less paid, less secure, and that would have an effect on quality of work and segregation. Index takes into account full-time employment equivalent on purpose, because it takes into account the time that women work. And we see that in some countries, the fact that women are engaged more in employment does not add much to index score, because full-time equivalent employment does not increase much, because they are working just few hours. Statistically, they are in the labor market. But the number of hours they spend there is so low that it does not have a very major effect on the score. In the domain of money, the major problems that still remain and the area which is still driving index down is financial resources. Gender gaps in earnings. Women are still earn much less than men. We know that. Then income is much lower. Pension gap at 40%, and it still stays there. These are the big problems still to be considered. And also, social inequalities in Europe, the difference between the wealthiest and the poorest is 5 times. And we can understand that these are very much to the detriment of women, because they are mostly among the ones who are with the lowest or at the lowest economic situation and bear consequences. In the domain of money, here we have a list of the best improved countries and also the list of the least improved countries during the 10 years period. And I will finish with the domain of health by saying that although, again, the change is very, very minor, here very, very important challenges remain, because women, lots of women are at the ill health around the time they retire, and lots of men die prematurely. Half of these deaths could be prevented if a certain targeted policy measures would be taken. In the domain of health, we have problems that actually affect men more than women. And because of social norms and sexist stereotypes and all these things, they have much more bigger effects on health of men as well, like life expectancy or risky behaviors like smoking and drinking. And we will talk more about the domain of health also in the afternoon session. We'll get a broader picture of it. Here are the list of countries that showed they put efforts into improving the situation in the domain of health. And here we have also numbers of least improved countries. And I would like to conclude by saying that the progress in gender equality, it still remains far from becoming a reality. It's too slow. It's as slow as snail's pace. And the most problematic areas remain domain of power, is decision-making, segregation in education, but also in labor markets, and unequal sharing of time for caring. In the first instance, the success of certain member states show very clearly that legislative actions like gender quota laws or public debates, or even the fact that the issue of decision-making was so high on European Union political agenda, it made an effect. We have more than enough evidence. It made a big change. It means it's possible. In the second instance, I think that with these new demands of our growing economies, and especially growing STEM sector, which is the fastest, the largest growing sector in the European Union at the moment, everybody would benefit more if we would open broader options for girls and boys in education, instead of offering them always very, very traditional and narrow paths and options. And caring duties. This is really it seems even a growing problem. So we're not really mitigating it to the extent that would be acceptable. Women spend a lot of time in paid and paid work, and of course have much less time for social activities, but also for self-care. And the new directive of work-life balance gives a hope for more substantial change in that area. I want to thank you a lot for your attention. I had to present a lot of information. I hope you found it useful, and we will discuss it further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Jolanta, and congratulations to the report, to the presentation, and also to the graphics, which I think show wonderfully all the results in one side. And now we would like to come to our first panel, Gender Equality in Disturbing Times. And I would like to ask our panelists on the stage. First, Regnér, Minister for Children, the Elderly, Gender Equality. She is representing the winning country. Welcome, welcome. Would you please take a seat? And next, Tiina Astola. She's the Director-General for Justice, Consumers and Gender Equality, and comes from Finland. Welcome. She has a strong legal background, and maybe she can think of some legal actions in this matter. Please. Wherever. And Joanna Maycock. She is the General Secretary of European Women's Lobby since 2014 and comes from England. The European Women's Lobby always has been a strong ally in our fight for gender equality, and Joanna is being a lifelong feminist. So, ladies, let's start with your comments.
Okay, I will also from here, or how would you prefer? Yes.
How you can sit, you can stand, whatever.
I think I'll actually start. Is that okay?
Okay, that's okay.
If there will be questions from the Thank you so much, and thank you, EIGE, Virginia, for giving us this data. Data is extremely important, and I think it also shows that women are just emotional about the fact that there is injustice based on gender. These are hard facts, so thank you for giving them to us. As a Minister for Gender Equality in a feminist government, obviously I'm really proud to be top of the list. And, but I think it's also important to be humble, because I think it reminds us of the fact that we have to work all the time and to continue to improve our results. Gender equality doesn't happen automatically. It's not that in a country on a Monday there is not gender equality and then the day after there is. That doesn't happen. It happens because of leadership, of political decisions. It's because governments allocate resources or not. It's because politicians fight in debates or not. I think that also it's different if you think that legislation is just something that you do because you want to punish people, or because you think that legislation is there because you want to show what the society should be like. And I think that this is all about political leadership, and I'm really happy to be on this panel, both with representatives from the Commission and from the civil society, because it also in the history of gender equality, we have been working together. And in the example of Sweden, we had never been where we are had we not been working together, NGOs and politicians, on these issues, because many of the progressive proposals were actually proposed by the NGOs, but also listened to by politicians, mainly women, and mainly from one side of politics. But it's important to remember that there have always been men supporting women in the fight, and it is very important that there are more men who do so. And it's also important to work together over party borders in these issues. And I think also that the Swedish example is an example of that. So gender equality really comes with political leadership. And I think it's interesting that the commissioner told us about the anecdote, how she was ridiculed when she was talking about facts. And I think that it reminds us of the fact that you're presenting this in a political context of resistance against gender equality. There are actually governments and leaders who do not want gender equality. And if you don't want it, then it's not likely that a lot of things will happen. So we have to have that political analysis as well. And it's also true that during history, women have been ridiculed for proposals which are 10 years later just something that everybody takes for granted. But many times women take those laughters, and they stand there alone. Then eventually it is impossible. It is possible to change. The world is possible to change. In our case, I think that we had also never been where we are. If we don't go back to the 70s, I won't walk you through the whole Swedish history from the 70s, but I think that some of the reforms which were absolutely basic also for the creation of the welfare state were also implemented to achieve gender equality. So the creation of the welfare state and some of the programs which have been most important to achieve gender equality go together. It's impossible to understand the welfare state without that. And they were also created many times with the aim of having high labor force participation for both women and men. So that was the aim and the goal and the struggle for that. And the reforms I'm talking about were individual taxation based on individuals, not families, individual social security systems with the incentives for both women and men to take up paid work, otherwise you're not eligible. So individual, not family, as the smallest unit in these kinds of systems. Very, very important to us. Dry technical things, but extremely important for the power shift that we are talking about. Also introduction of elderly care and childcare, obviously. We talk a lot about childcare, that is very important, but elderly care is increasingly important in countries with aging populations. Financed by taxes in our case. I don't know of any other example where you can actually achieve high levels of labor force participation and not finance these services with taxes. That is at least our model. But also the fact that we at the same time introduce parental leave, and slowly but surely with incentives for both women and men to take the parental leave, because it is in the interest of the right of the child to have access to both parents. And it also makes it less risky for employers to employ women. After all, men can have children until they're 80 or so. Talk about risks. And also, at the same time, we introduce laws on sexual and reproductive health and rights, abortion rights. very important for women and men to be able to control their fertility and whether to have kids or not. Of course, the right to divorce, but that was before that. So you can choose your life and whether to take up paid work or not, if you can move away also from a violent relationship and move and support yourself with the children you might have and so on. All of this goes together. So haven't we done anything since the 70s? Yes, we have, but I wanted to point this out to you because they were fundamental for our model, and I know that many of these reforms are still controversial in many member states, but they're no secrets. They could be implemented, but it is really up to member states to decide whether they want to implement them or not. That's not really the Commission's fault or business or anything, it's really the member states. However, I think that this index really shows that we all have to do more, and I think therefore that the Commission should have a strategy, something that puts more pressure on member states. We have always had a strategy before on a high-level strategy, and now we don't. And that actually means, for instance, that gender equality ministers very seldom go to Brussels because there is no pressure put on member states in this way. And I urge the Commission to work this way. And it's not because I like processes and papers, it's because I like results.
Thank you.
What we do, I know I have to close. Gender budgeting is an important tool, also a very dry and technical thing, unless you know what you want to do with it. And we want to shift these power structures from men towards women. The Minister of Finance put out, for the first time, the fundamental steering documents for the whole process to me and my colleagues, demanding from us that any proposal we put forward in the budget process has to be analyzed from a gender perspective. And it has to tell her, the finance minister, how this will affect gender equality. And otherwise, she won't even regard it. And this has had the effect that we have invested in areas where a lot of women work, in measures against violence, in different aspects of the welfare state, most of all, but also other parts of society, in order to reach gender equality. And I think I'm mostly proud of investments that we made towards parts of the public sector, for instance, where social workers work, or where nurses, assistant nurses, and so on in elderly care and healthcare work, because, as you were saying in your example, these are groups of women who many times have too much responsibility in relation to their mandates, and are also undervalued, and that creates health problems. And we have those problems in Sweden too. So many women many times pay with their individual health because there are structural problems which can only be solved if the national and local levels and employer levels work together. So that I am proud of. And I think that you pointed out many of the problems. It is important, it is possible to change. It is important. Last week we had a report on gender pay gaps, and they are closing, although they still exist. They shouldn't. Obviously, violence is a big issue, and we work hard on that. That's another seminar, maybe. Yeah. And I think also, to close, that you have all showed that the big problem, the big challenge for the EU right now is competitiveness. But still, I think your index shows that we say no to parts of the labor force and parts of the knowledge within the populations which could contribute to that competitiveness. How can we afford that? So this is a rights issue, but it's really also the solution to competitiveness for the European Union. And it is really also, I think, the answer to the challenge of aging populations. And I think also that if you say no to gender equality, because apparently some parts of the Union did that for the last 10 years, or didn't invest in it. But at the same time, you say no to migration. How will you solve the problem of competitiveness and aging societies? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we have heard what Sweden has been and is doing right. So we have a good example. Maybe we can follow in one stage. But now we hear, please, Tiina Astola. Would you like? Yeah.
Dear participants, we have heard now passionate speeches, interventions by politicians and also statisticians, and now you have the boring bureaucrat. But I must say that I've been a feminist since probably when I was born. I come from the family of 3 elder brothers, so I've been fighting my way ahead. And so it's in me, even though I'm a bureaucrat. I'd like to say a few words about the index and then what we are doing. So first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It was lively and had a lot of information. And I think one thing which is so important to see that this development is not linear. We are having setbacks in many countries. I saw many in my own country and felt bad about that. And I think it's one of these things that we know that we should not take things for granted in this equality sphere. The Commission is, of course, the obvious user of the index. We need to have the data in order to have evidence-based policy in several areas of justice and social policy. But I think it's a challenge in the Commission as well as in the member states at national level, and it was already kind of mentioned here. This is not for equality specialists only. The important thing is that this data is used in whatever politics is made. And an index like this can be a really powerful tool. And I think there you need the processes that were mentioned, or the procedures, that somebody really looks whether in a proposal this angle has been tackled. And we have now already, I think in the Commission, we have received from other directorates general requests of this data and how to work with this data, which I think is very good. And of course, the time is ripe for this. The work-life balance initiative has been mentioned by many here already. And what often happens in these panels, almost everything that one has thought about saying has been said already. So I won't go into the details of this initiative, but maybe some statistics on this. In 2016, about 60% of EU women were employed compared to 77% of men. So in the labor market, there is this 10 percentage units, or how do you say that, gap. And this gap is dangerous for women because it means really, it reflects to the pay gap, which is 16% in the EU. And what I think is shocking is the pension gap, which is 40%. And when I think when the family structures are not the same as they used to be, now we have a lot more elderly women alone with a very small pension. So the poverty of elderly women is growing, and I think it is shocking. So I will not go to the leaves or the structures that we are trying to improve now with the work-life balance, except for saying from my own experience, had not the so-called group of 9 really fought in the 60s in Finland, I wouldn't be here now, because I wouldn't have had my children in the daycare. So I think the work that was done in the 60s and 70s was very important, I think, in the Nordic countries. So, but the work-life balance is not the only initiative that we are having. Already it was mentioned by the Vice President that the Gender Equality Index is 66.2 out of 100 in accordance, according to the data. So we have a lot to do. And one thing which kind of hurts is also mentioned here already, and it's the fact that when states have problems in economy, it always hits the most vulnerable, and in this case also women. And this should not be the case. The women should not be the hostage of weaker economy, but that is the case. But I was very happy to see that, for instance, that Italy won in this contest, a kind of a beauty contest, which we did have. It means that even when the economy is not at its best, you can do things on this field. And later this year, in a few weeks' time, there will be the Equal Pay Day. And we all know that we don't have the same, the women don't have the same euro as the men. So it's time to reflect the disparities in remunerations. Commission mentioned the action plan on gender pay gap, and I think it is a very important plan. In Finland, the segregation of professions is the major reason for this gender pay gap, and it's extremely difficult to tackle because it is about education, it is about the stereotypes, it's about the little girl wanting to be the nurse. It's not bad that the little girl wants to be the nurse, but she should have the possibility to imagine to be an engineer or a CEO or whatever. So I think this is an important action plan that we are going to have, and there we are trying to look at it as like from a big picture, really trying to see the different fields where one could act and make it very concrete. It was mentioned here before that we don't have a strategy at this moment. We have an action plan. I'm a very practical person, so I think sometimes action plan works really well, and we can take things forward. Then we will have the high-level colloquium, and I think this is raising it to the political level here in the Commission. We will have the first Vice President, Timmermans, who has been extremely interested in this. It is also his idea that this would be about gender, and it is again this kind of a helicopter view, but with a very high level, and I think this is a way also to push the member states. Then we have the focused actions against violence against women. And we really look forward then seeing the coming figures on this thing. I think Commissioner said, well, in some member states, in some countries, in some parts of the countries, it's still kind of accepted that there is violence in the family, violence against women. And of course, this is totally unacceptable. So we can bring this again, and we need to bring these things over and over and over again to the level of discussion. So it is really a clearly time or a momentum where we are at the moment. And I would really warmly like to thank all the stakeholders who have been working in this, and also all the politicians who are enthusiastically, passionately working on this in the member states. But we need the data, and even though there are people who don't want to look at the data, if we don't have the data, we don't have any tools to work on. Thank you, and we are looking forward to the next index. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiina, very much. Thank you, Tiina Astola, for telling us how useful this report is and how it can be used. And now it's Joanna, and I didn't shake your hand before.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We didn't coordinate.
Oh, we did.
I'll stand up since everybody else did. Thank you. It's a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest, isn't it, this? Who's going up and who's going down? Thank you also to Minister Regnér for acknowledging the work that the women's movement and women's rights organisations do tirelessly across the EU and across the world to put pressure actually on governments and politicians and CEOs to make a difference in the lives of women. It's really great to see so many of our members here today as well, from different parts of Europe, from European Women Lobby members, and also other partners from civil society who work in other domains of human rights and social justice, who are, I think, increasingly aware of the need to integrate a gender dimension into their work. So at the European Women's Lobby, we are great fans of the Gender Equality Index, and I really want to congratulate Virginia and all the team, and Jolanta, who gave such a fantastic presentation of the results. This Gender Equality Index for us it's unique. It's unlike anything else in the world, and it really allows us to measure progress, identify gaps, and to monitor the effectiveness of measures, legislation in particular, but also other policies, what's working and what's not working. And we really also wanted to acknowledge the huge amount of work that's gone into trying to introduce new and better ways of measuring gender equality in this index, the attempts to try and integrate an intersectional perspective, which we know has been extremely complicated, and we really want to acknowledge that, and also the efforts to bring statistics on violence against women into the index. It's an area which the European Women's Lobby has worked on for the past 20 years. It's incredibly difficult to get statistics and reliable statistics and measures on violence against women, but it's essential to understand the whole picture of equality in Europe. So when we look at the results, honestly, to us, it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute shock and shame that the last 10 years have shown so little progress. We must see that in Europe in particular, we've made incredible progress over the last 100 years. Next year in the United Kingdom, where I come from, we'll be celebrating the centenary of the first rights to vote for some women. And 100 years on, I think we've made incredible progress. But we've just stalled. We've just stopped in the last 10 years. And we will not wait another 100 years to achieve equality. And at this rate, that's what it will take. It's just not good enough. Women work harder for less money, for less power, even less fun, apparently, if we look at the social dimension of time as well. We don't want to be, and we don't think we should be, but what we're seeing in these numbers is that women are treated like second-class citizens in Europe today. It's just not good enough. So I said we really want to welcome the work that the Equality Index has done here to explore intersecting inequalities. So the different ways in which the different kinds of identities and experiences intersect in exacerbating inequalities. And we've known that for a long time, as have our colleagues who work on racism, on migration, on disability, on age, on youth. But to have this kind of attempt to get data and the evidence behind that is absolutely essential. That your ability, that your race, that your ethnic origin, that your age have a secondary impact on your income, on your poverty, or the amount of care that you do. I want to talk about time, because it's about time. And what we've seen here is that we actually have a growing gender time gap, with significant gaps between the amount of time that women and men invest in domestic work, in unpaid care work, and also the amount of time that therefore women have to invest in their careers, in work, in paid work, that the time that women have to invest in politics, political life or social life or decision making in other ways. The third of men doing absolutely no housework at all. That's quite astonishing, isn't it? It's time to get the rubber gloves on and find out how the washing machine works, apparently. When women have to take on the lion's share of the care work, and we know that if you are migrant women, you're likely to do even more of the unpaid care work or the low-paid care work. They have less time to participate in political participation or in becoming the chair of the bank. It's just, that's how it is. This gender time gap is something that is deeply rooted, and it's deeply rooted in feminist analysis and understanding in economics. What's terrible to acknowledge here is that it's getting worse. It's getting worse in Europe. It's about time, and it's about time for action by the European Union. These indicators show us that we're stalling and that we are failing, and that we are failing women, and we are failing families, and we're failing our societies. I wanted to say a little bit about power as well. Jolanta explained really well what's happening when it comes to power, and we also saw that's the area which is increasing at the fastest pace. We would say partly because it was so low to start with, but also partly because there have been legislative measures across the European Union. We saw the countries which contributed to that increase, Italy and France, have both introduced legislation and quotas to increase the number of women on corporate boards and in parliaments. Legislation works. So, way forward. What needs to be done? Because the previous speakers have already said we know what to do, we know what works, so we also know it's possible, so we shouldn't be too depressed, right? We also live in hope. We know that it's not only possible, but we know that it's necessary. It's necessary for happier, healthier, more sustainable societies, for better family life, for better working life, even for the environment. So why are we not doing it? It's about political will. And for us, I'm just going to say a few things that we think need to happen in the European Union, and they need to happen right away. And the first is we absolutely have to move away from austerity, politics, and economics. It has been a political, an economic, and a social disaster for Europe, and it's been much worse for women, and it's been far, far worse for women from minorities. We need to have an economic and social model which values care, which puts care at the center. Caring for others is not something that's nice to do. It's essential, it's important for our families, for our societies, for our planet. This means investing in social protection that enables men and women to share the care work. It means investing in social infrastructure. The Commissioner talked about the European social funds. I think also the European Investment Bank is a source of investment in care and social infrastructure. We are expected to ask things that may sound crazy, apparently, but we would expect there to be the provision of free childcare for all families in Europe, for all children in Europe, and it is possible and it is happening in some parts of Europe already. It means looking at the tax and social security systems and understand them in a gendered nature, so understand that work and money and time are gendered, and these statistics help us to do that. It means looking at the future EU budget through a gendered lens, not just the gender parts of the budget, but the whole budget, whether it's on agriculture or on regional funds. So we want to see a gender lens placed on the multiple annual financial framework. It means legal measures to support the redistribution of care. Yes, from women to the state, but also between women and men. So we fully support the work-life balance package, and we hope that that will progress and become legislation and practice. We continue to support extended and improved maternity rights for women as well. And we need to address the absolutely shocking levels of discrimination that are faced by pregnant women and women returning to work after childbirth. We need to make sure that the entire social rights pillar is seen as an opportunity to address gender inequality. So not just the work-life balance package, but the rest of it. And when the heads of state meet at the Social Summit in November, we expect them to do so. Ratifying and implementation of the Istanbul Convention to address violence against women is also absolutely essential. It's about time. It's overdue, in fact. Most of all, what I'm saying is that we need a renewed political impetus to address gender equality. We do need a political strategy. An action plan is not enough. We need a strategy that engages all the actors in the European Union to critical actions to address gender inequality. We will be also looking forward to the colloquium that was mentioned earlier, the colloquium on women's rights that's hosted by the Vice President Timmermans later in November. And there we hope to see really a renewed positioning of women's voices and women's concerns at the center of the European political debate, at the center of the discussions about the future of Europe, because at the moment, women's voices are silent in that debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for your great input and for all of your great input. And now, as we are running a little bit late in time, I would like to have just one round of questions with you, and maybe afterwards one for the audience. So let's start with Joanna already told us. How did you feel about the report? Coming back to our main topic, please.
For me?
I think it's up. Hello? Okay.
Thank you very much. I feel about the report that it's very needed, and I feel that it is good to show steps taken, but I think it is it is depressing to see the results, because they are not at all good enough. And I think that these are rights issues, but there's somehow also about survival of modern societies, and also whether women feel part of citizenship, I would say. And today is the International Girls' Day, the rights of the girl or the girl child. And I think that we really owe to girls, and boys for that matter, to create a world where they are asked for, and where they don't need 2 exams to come in question for a job that a guy with high school degree can 2 degrees in comparison to a guy with a high school degree, because that is they will buy that. I don't know what they will do, but it's just, I think that this is about political leadership, and everyone can do something here and now. I also wanted to say that we should all do our part. From the Swedish side, the Prime Minister organizes together, invites to a social EU summit on social issues in November. And I am happy to have to invite incoming presidencies, the 3 rounds of incoming presidencies and other actors, to a pre-conference before that summit to put these issues exactly on the agenda, because I really think that gender equality is about rights, but it is also true that in my country, for instance, we have the highest levels of labor force participation. We have the highest levels for women and men ever measured in the EU at the moment. Women with a foreign background have the same average levels of labor force participation as women in general in the EU. And I think we have to discuss this. It is possible. Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So, a lot of work to do. Maybe you?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think I said something already before, which is that this data is absolutely necessary. Without that, we cannot make our arguments visible, we cannot make them strong. Then again, the other thing I said was the non-linear kind of development, which is, I think this is one of the things that shocks us. We think that things get better, and then we see that they don't. Then another thing, I would like to make a reference to EU Justice Scoreboard, which is presenting the different member states' justice systems and also giving data on that. And the idea is that when member states see each other's data or see how they kind of rank, they don't only say, as we Finns do, oh, the Swedes are always the best, and we never can attain them, which is what I feel every time. But we can see that what are they doing better? And can we learn something from them? And we have, for instance, learned from Sweden. We were looking at the working areas in this time when we were trying to improve the economy, that how far should one come to work? And we realized that in Sweden, they had kind of looked at it very closely as to the women question and seen that it's usually the women who take the children to the daycare, which means that their way to work would be much longer if the distance from the work would be longer. So I think it's important also to break data into smaller units to understand what's happening or what might happen with our proposals.
Thank you. Thank you also for mentioning, the scoring, because I think what men really like is being first. It doesn't matter in which field, but they look at the scores and say, oh, the winner is Sweden, why can't we be it? So maybe this could be one sort of another trail or train towards the right decision making. We can only hope so. Joanna?
I mean, yes, we're shocked and dismayed and outraged, but we're not that surprised by the results, I think it's fair to say. Because if you live, as we do, in the struggle for women's rights every day, then you see and you can feel that there's a lack of progress. But it does give me hope. Firstly, because we have that data. and it's in the public domain, and it's credible, and it's reliable, and nowhere else in the world is there anything like it. So I think the fact that it's there, that it has the potential to spur some action, I think is for us something very, very important. We will be really using this data and these numbers to put pressure on the various spaces at which we operate in, at national level, at local level, and at European level, to say it's not good enough, and we need to take serious action. I'm also hopeful because we see the opportunities. We see there's so many opportunities to improve on gender equality, improve on women's rights, to make sure that all women are included, that no women are left behind. And the benefits of that for everybody, for women and men, for economies, for societies, for the European Union, for the environment, are massive. So there's nothing to stop us except political will. And the final thing which gives me hope is that I think most people in Europe don't know these numbers, honestly. But I think more and more people are feeling that stagnation on gender equality and women's rights. They're feeling that we're not moving forward. And that's why we're seeing such an exciting upsurge in engagement and activism for women's rights by feminist activists, by young women and men, but by people across generations. And that gives me hope that we are going to enter a new phase of the fight for gender equality over the next decade.
So thank you very much. And now I would like to ask the audience whether there are any questions or even from Slido. Okay, we should have some people with microphones here. Okay. In a second.
It's on the chair.
Oh.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation of the gender equality. My name is Barbara Helfrich. I'm from the ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation. And I was listening very carefully to the Swedish minister, and thank you very much for your description of the success story of Sweden. And we're very pleased that Sweden has made it to first place. We also look at Sweden not only as an example, but also as a trailblazer to some extent for European policies to bring forward the European Union, in particular to work-life balance. And I also listened to you, and you said very clearly it is up to member states, and it's not up to the European Commission to prescribe what member states are going to do. But you yourself said if we want to move forward, it's not enough to just wait it out. We have to be active. So my question to you is, to what extent will Sweden support the work-life balance package, which is now in front of the Council?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Actually, my point was that when you see to the reforms that many of the Nordic countries implemented 30, 40 years ago, they are known to all member states, and they are in fields where the European Union does not have power, should not have power, according to us. For example, individual taxation. But I know, to talk about the elephant in the room, this is a controversial question, because when you do these kinds of reforms, you move away from the family setting, you move away from the housewife model, you will probably have more divorces in society, because that makes women, that gives women the power to live their own lives if they have their own incomes, which are high as men's, or much higher than today. So, I mean, if country X wants to introduce individual taxation, do it tomorrow. All finance ministers know about this. But what I also meant was that since this is not happening, I think that the Commission has an important role to put pressure on the member states. And to my mind, that pressure is not tough enough at the moment. That's just my opinion, and I know that is the opinion from many member states. And it also decreases the role of the gender ministers in these kinds of discussions and with their other colleagues. That is also my opinion. When it comes to the proposal. We think it is very useful, and I know it will be discussed. It's actually in the hands bureaucratically with the Minister of Labour in my case, but we think it's very important to be very constructive when it comes to this, and we think it's in general a very good intention and all of that, but then we have to discuss parts. But yeah, I think I made my point.
Okay. Anybody else from your... No. We had another question, please.
Do you hear me? Yes. My name is Dagmar Schumacher. I'm the director of UN Women here in Brussels. First of all, congratulations to Virginia and the whole team and Jolanta for a fantastic presentation. And yes, I share, it's really depressing. And I mean, because we spoke about the political pressure that is needed, one tool we also have at hand are the Sustainable Development Goals. All member states have signed the Sustainable Development Goals. There is goal number 5. Within that goal, we have specific targets to also look, for example, on non-paid care work. All member states have to report. Let's use that tool also to really further increase the pressure. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I saw another hand over there. Please.
Thank you. I'm Yvonne Schaap from the Netherlands. I work at the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. And I was wondering, thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. It's very interesting. And we were talking a lot about the gaps. And economic sectors in Europe are looking at gaps to close them and to even to be competitiveness. So I was wondering, the data they show, is it even possible that data also show the loss of profits and of competitiveness when we ignore the whole untapped potential of women in the...
Okay. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the question or the comment. I don't have the figures now here with me, but in the work-life balance, that's exactly what we try to do in that initiative. You know that for the better regulation rules that we have to show the Regulation Scrutiny Board, we have to show what would be the economic impact of our proposals. So we have really tried to gauge the numbers. So you would find them there, and I would then think my colleagues could maybe help here later.
I have to say we are very good at numbers here. One more question over there. Can you?
Okay. My name is Laha Ahmed. I'm from Upnahak in England, but also part of ENA, Ethnic European Network Against Racism. Thank you for all of your work. I've been looking through all of the literature, and my interest obviously is in terms of race and gender. And I'd want your thoughts of how that work is being captured currently, or if it's not, what your thoughts are. I was really pleased to hear in terms of Sweden and the women. In the UK, we've just had a report that's been published which basically shows that there's a big disparity. Although women are highly educated, they're still not being employed due to issues around racism and Islamophobia.
Thank you very much. I think we take another question. Over here, yeah? Please. Yes, and then you come.
Good morning. Maciej Kucharczyk, representing EIGE Platform Europe, but also Vice President of the social platform. My question goes to the Directorate-General. I was by the way, thank you very much for all the panelists for very empowering speeches, but you mentioned in particular the fact that you are shocked with the persisting gender pension gap, as well the increasing actually poverty risk among older persons, in particular older women, because we know perfectly that when you look at the older population, this is mainly among older women that they are much higher. They are at a much higher poverty risk compared even to other age groups. So my question is the following one. Looking at the proposal of the Commission for the EU Pillar of Social Rights, do you see, apart from the package on work-life balance, any other elements that could actually, let's say, contribute to dealing with the question of poverty among older women, about gender pension gap? Is anything else among the 12 principles that you think, you hope, that it will be possible, of course, with the contribution of member states, to implement in order to address this problem? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very glad that with this edition of Gender Equality Index, we expanded this, one of its domains, which is called Intersecting Inequalities. And we put a lots of efforts into trying actually to look into the situation of specific groups of women and men. We know very well that some groups of women might share more in common with other groups of men than within the group itself. And that was very, very important part of our analysis, and we will talk about it in the next session more. Of course, conceptually, we look at it very broadly, and we take very many differences into account, as many differences as they are enshrined in different European also legislation, and we are very sensitive to. But when it comes to measurements and data, we're always a little bit kind of bound by what is available at the European level, what would be comparable, and put us in that perspective that index is presenting, comparable at the EU level. And unfortunately, data based on ethnicity is not available. We do not have actually good data. And of course, we have a hope that actually in the context of current developments, what's going on in Europe, especially migration, and we might have better quality data in the future to be able to see and to track the progress of integration of people in the societies. But at the moment, unfortunately, it's not the case. But what we would like to call our stakeholders, and we have been doing that all the time. Please take the data that we produced, and if you have a data at your national level about the different composition of and more breakdowns according to different other categories, you can perfectly do that analysis, and especially civil society organizations could then bring forward certain issues further. And we would be very much willing to cooperate on that, but unfortunately for us, it would be very difficult to really map national data sources to be able to kind of explain it to the kind of deeper extent. But we are fully supportive of that approach. We support it, and we would, I would just probably invite to cooperate with us further in order to see how further we could go on this intersecting inequalities. But what I can promise is that intersecting inequalities from now on will play a very important role in Gender Equality Index. We are not going to make a step back, only the step forward, in order to improve and to have more information and to make then this index in this way closer to people. Mm-hmm. Closer to people.
Thank you, Jolanta. Tiina?
Thank you very much. In the social pillar, it is really DG Justice has been concentrating on this work-life balance. So I probably don't have a good answer to your question, but I would like to stress that in the work-life balance, as we are looking at the structure of the different kinds of leaves, the idea there, of course, is balancing the pay that the women and men in as a whole will, or the earnings that they will have later on. And then I would come back to the action plan on pay gap, because I think that would be then the most powerful tool for this, and we would be looking at the pensions there.
Thank you very much, Tiina. I think we take one more question from Slido, and then we go for the coffee break.
Yes, we've got one question which has been very popular on Slido, so thank you for everybody for contributing. And I would like to ask this question to Joanna. So the question is that what would be the 3 most important measures to improve gender equality? 3.
So I think we need legislation and we need political will to do that, and we need money. So to make that really clear, and that all of that, because all of that needs to tackle what the underlying discrimination is in our society, in our families, in ourselves as well, and the biases that we have. So yes, we need to, when it comes to the European Union, we need a high-level commitment enshrined in a political strategy that binds all EU member states, all cities, all companies, all politicians to advance gender equality. We need a budget for the next 7-year period that acknowledges that women and men have a different experience, and that seeks to invest in those things like care. And we need legislation that's not only written down, but is also followed through, that is invested in when it comes to violence against women, when it comes to redistribution of care. So yes, it's legislation, it's political will, and it's money.
Thank you, Joanna. And one last statement from Tiina.
As a long-time law drafter in my career, when I hear that people say we we need more legislation, very often I think, yes, that's true. But it's also true that we need the enforcement of the existing legislation. And this is something that we should be, I think, be talking more about. Because, for instance, in dismissal protection of the pregnant women coming home to work after they're having been at home, it's the enforcement of the existing legislation which is important.
And one more sentence for...
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this to start with, and thank you, EIGE, for this very good platform for discussion. I want to come back to what Dagmar said. I should reveal I have a background with UN Women as well, but everybody should really relate to the 2030 agenda because we have committed to it. And I think it is with these figures, I think most of us think that Europe is the most advanced, modern part of the world should be. That's the picture we have of ourselves, together with a few other countries maybe. We think of that like that about ourselves. But we really have to do this better if we want to. I think that the 2030 should be like a competition about being the best in terms of implementing gender equality and increasing girls' and women's rights. But we have a lesson to learn there. And my last point is that we haven't said a lot. The Commissioner spoke about the role of men. Crucial, because that is what's lacking. So political leadership and will, and men's participation and voices to be, and that men show solidarity with women. That is needed. Thank you.
So thank you very much, ladies, for your most perfect input. You know, if we could follow up all the points, we would be there. Thank you. Thanks for the audience. And Mira?
Yes, we'll do one more exercise before we break for coffee. So time to take your mobile devices out of the pockets, and we go to Slido. Let's get the Slido on the screen, and then you are already logged in on the EIGE index. So what you need to do now is to go to the polls tab, and there you will find a question. Can you describe in one word what is your reaction? How do you feel about the results of the Gender Equality Index 2017? Give us one word to describe how you feel about it, and that will draw us a picture of how we feel here today about where we are on gender equality.
Okay.
Kind of sad sentiment in the words I can see. Let's see if we have anybody who has been positively surprised. No, I don't think so, just surprised. We got upset, enlightened, strength, so, but also very disappointed, shocked, sad, depressed. Well, I think we should all take this in a very positive way, that there are many things for us to do. And thank you very much for being here as today to get this discussion started. While we are still working on our final picture, we can start going towards a coffee break. It is when you enter the room, it's on your left-hand side. The bathrooms, should you need them, are at the very end of that room. And if anybody wants to take a smoke, then you'd need to go to the atrium where we have smoking areas. We are just a little bit late in time, so I would like you to kindly be back by 20 to 12. And then we will continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.